What fears play on Russian minds? Are they the usual paranoid imperialist ones about the West and NATO, or other, less bothersome, but equally just as Western? A recent survey has given us an insight, both unsurprising and surprising. Join me and Darasz for How We Got Here.
Old MacDonald had a farm, but not in Russia. Following Moscow's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, many Western corporations closed their Russian restaurants and cashed them out to local successor chains. And although the food looks similar, the devil's in the details.
Overall, I'd say it's not as good as a Big Mac.
Although rebranded, the sandwich's role as comfort food remains unchanged. And Russians do need to comfort their fears, which they have aplenty. According to the most recent edition of the National Fear Index, the situation in the Kursk region was Russians' #1 concern in the second half of 2024. And while the threat of nuclear war placed only 6th, the second most anxiety-inspiring event turned out to be the slowdown of YouTube, something that happened at the behest of Kremlin. The move should not come as a surprise, given recent analysis showing a drop in Russians' trust in traditional media, which customarily play the role of the Kremlin mouthpiece. Making it more difficult to use a platform of international content suggests that the Russian government wishes for its citizens to remain inside an information bubble of its own making. One example of the Kremlin tightly controlling the narrative is the Russian Statistical Office, which failed to publish detailed inflation data for September on time. The reason? Skyrocketing prices in Russia. Withholding of statistics is an example of the Kremlin's psychological warfare aimed at creating a false image of reality of how Russians live. These machinations and Russians' concerns over access to their favorite content may prove that Russian citizens are in general more concerned about their prosperity than anything else.
The war that is going on in Ukraine spoils the entire economy. All the money goes there.
Russia allocated close to 6% of GDP for its military in 2024. With further increases planned for 2025. But as a survey by an independent Russian pollster showed last month, among supporters of Russian leader Vladimir Putin, 61% desired a peace treaty with Ukraine with mutual concessions, while 43% sought restoration of ties with the West. The same survey found that 83% of Putin's backers wanted the government to prioritize domestic, social, and economic problems.
Everything is very bad. Why? You know why. A lot of companies left our market, and a lot of people lost their jobs. I am among them.
Still, Russia's low unemployment rate of about 2.5% and real wages of 9.2% paint a much more favorable economic landscape. But that's for all the wrong reasons, including the fact that wage hikes have been stimulated by huge injections of money from Russia's federal budget. Analysts have argued that the numbers indicate an overheating economy, inflation, and a workforce strained by Moscow's war effort.
Our guest today is Bartłomiej, the Programme Director of the Warsaw Security Forum. Welcome once more to the programme.
Good morning, lovely to be here with you.
Great to have you. Russian fears. We're going to be talking about this survey, a recent survey. Before we itemise what's high and not on the list, is there any point to conducting a survey in Russia during wartime and getting anything useful out of it?
Well, I certainly think that there is a cost for doing so. Of course, the society is less open to answer to the questions of those who are conducting these surveys. But actually, the one that we are talking right now about, it actually showed that war is not the only thing that people have on their minds when they think about the fears, and honestly speaking, also the history of this survey. So they also show the change in the mentality of Russians throughout the conduct of this war. So at least if you do not believe in every single percentage or in every single answer, the trends could be visible in this kind of surveys.
Yes, I mean, something useful always can be gleaned from these surveys. The first fear of is the Kursk invasion or intervention, and the Ukrainians are still on the soil of Holy Mother Russia. Then YouTube, the weaponization, not the weaponization, but the use of YouTube as a sanction to against people who don't show enough respect for Russia. So they kind of slow down the reception, that kind of stuff. And the third one was illegal migration into Russia. These are, so they seem to be standard Russian fears that they've held for quite some time now.
Yes, that's true. Although, of course, the trends. I mean, the fact that those are the three main answers. Each one of these answers is very much connected to the events that happened internally in Russia. First one, of course, the Ukrainian incursion in Kursk Oblast. The fact that the Ukrainians are still in possession of some of the territory of Russia. This has sparked a lot of attention internally in Russia. Not necessarily only to the bad in terms of the Russian way of thinking. It also caused quite a patriotic movement internally in Russia. With, if I'm not mistaken, the articles I read actually that people started drafting into the army because of what happened in Kursk. Not only like forced to do so, but also volunteer.
Upsurge in like 9/11 or in 1914.
To some degree, yes. I mean, there was a patriotic tune in the response of the Russian society as compared to the previous actions, because the war wasn't considered to be like a part of the everyday Russian living, because it happened on the Ukrainian territory.
So is this hitting home to elites in St. Petersburg and Moscow, or is this still a provincial?
Paradoxically,
have the ripples stopped at the provinces?
I would say that it actually is very much a Moscow thing right now, because the thing is that in Moscow it's quite significant because of the fact that people who enlist in the territory of Moscow, they are better paid than people who would be enlisting to the same kind of signing the same kind of contract in different parts of Russia. So there is like a chain of people who are actually traveling to Moscow in order to actually enlist in Moscow, not in every other place. Actually, I recently read an article that was even published in Russian media that was covering this this story, and it actually showed the amount of people who are enlisting directly in Moscow because of the financial difference that it gives them. But this is like one story. I mean, of course, the incursion in Kursk, very much connected to, I would say, the rise of some kind of a patriotic movement internally in Russia. Better, I would say, in a sense, mental connection between what is happening on the Russian territory as compared to the Ukrainian territory. Second thing, which is like the limitation of YouTube service in Russia. That's very individualistic, to be honest. I mean, the approach of Russians, they're listing their fears not on the basis of what is actually touching the whole society as such, but what they feel is touching them personally. So even in this kind of the response to this survey, loads of these answers, in my opinion, are actually very much individualistic in terms of what kind of a reason people are given out. I
suppose we share as well. We're addicted to YouTube just as the Russians are.
Yeah, because they were, and this is also quite fascinating to me, because of course we all know that there is a propaganda in Russian media. Russians tend to, I would say, accept this fact that there is propaganda in Russian media. So YouTube was actually either a service that was for them the opportunity to reach out to, you would say, news that are not polluted by the state narrative, or rather the other way around. It was actually the basis of their entertainment. And if you look at it from this perspective, the truth is that the answer that they fear about the limitation of the YouTube service may not necessarily be a political reason, but rather actually the reason that someone limits their entertainment. And this is what I consider to be very individualistic, very personal, not political thinking, but very personal attachment to some kind of a limitation of freedom.
So does that mean it goes into areas like the Russians having their own version of McDonald's or some of the luxury brand items, the luggage, the cars. Would they feel the same that way, or is it something that comes into their homes and affects them directly?
That is quite interesting, because in every single of these services that you mentioned, there is something which is given them in exchange. So McDonald's closes its operations in Russia. Then there is a new brand open that pretty much gives the same kind of a service as McDonald's did. With YouTube, it is a bit different here. I mean, they literally feel that there is a limitation put on their entertainment, and that's interesting to me, because you can consider that as a limitation of the freedom, but I wouldn't say that this is a limitation of the political freedom. It is a limitation of the freedom to enjoy things, simply speaking. So that's why I call it like individualistic approach. And the third one that you mentioned. This is
the illegal migration.
Illegal migration. This is very much connected also to this terrorist attack that happened in Russia quite recently. So once again, maybe that is a fear rather of things happening on Russian soil, which are not necessarily connected directly to the war in Ukraine. Of course, there could be a link between those two, an opportunity seen by terrorists and explored by them. But this is also, I would say, rather a fear of the escalation between the nationalities internally in Russian Federation. There is a huge minority of people coming from these territories that were accused of being a part of this plot. And I would rather actually think about this answer in that context as actually Russians, some Russians being afraid of some kind of internal divisions, maybe some kind of the movement of people outside of biggest centers back to the smaller republics.
Those are the top three subjects that they were fearful of. There was a great thing mentioned by President Putin about the resilience of the Russian people, that we can take it, we are tougher than the West, we are the macho culture, the West is soft. But if they are concerned about YouTube being slowed down, or perhaps the McDonald's isn't as higher, is tastier than it used to be. Am I reading too much into it, that the Russians are actually enjoying their creature comforts just as much as anybody else? They have the same fears about migration, that kind of stuff. Well,
I would say that, of course, they have the same kind of entertainment, the same kind of enjoyment in their life as we have, and this actually, the answer speaks very much to this. Once again, I would repeat that this individualistic feeling that some of their freedoms are limited. The thing here is that they are capable of sustaining a high level of, I would say, firstly, determinism in their life, the acceptance of their own fate, to which actually any change in the political system or another war, events such as this extraordinary events, they are simply speaking taken as granted, because they feel that this is a part of their life, that they would have to accept that. And secondly, I still believe that if things go deeper in terms of the attacks against the Russian territory, there is, of course, this huge potential of Russians like rallying around the flag effect. The problem with that is that still the image of Russia as a potent power, as something that should be actually a point of reference to the whole world, I would say that it is still very much existent in the society. A lot of these answers are actually connected to the fact that someone is limiting, for example, or attacking the image of Russia, and this sparks the intervention in their own perception of the world. And there is a huge necessity, I would say, among the Russian people to feel to feel extraordinary in a sense, that they're not one of the nations, but they're actually one of the potent powers, one of the
anointed nations.
Yeah.
They also have this thing which we both needed to Google, I think, the Quadrobics and the Furry Fandom. These Western trends, modes about quadrobics exercising or dressing up as furry animals, and the furry fandom is similar sort of subculture of you think you're an animal. I suppose that's very short. And this just proves, isn't it just proving to the Russians that we need to fight against this Western decadent disease that's coming over, LGBT, all that stuff?
Quite interesting. I mean, to me, it proves two things. First of all, that the trends that are visible among subcultures in the West and in Russia are quite similar. That things are happening. I mean, there is an exchange of cultural memes, things like that. Of course, in this context, it is also by the use of the propaganda, it is connected to this Western decadence, and therefore treated as something that could pollute the pure Russian souls or culture. And secondly, it also shows to me one thing that might be actually an opportunity for us as the Westerners, that there is a space for our narrative to actually to break this wall and to enter the Russian territory, Russian minds. I wouldn't actually
get them to be as soft as we are.
Yes, to some degree, but I wouldn't right now lobby for us to spread the image of as you said, furry animals, things like that. But on the other hand, it shows that they are open to the messaging from the West. So if there are like people who are adoring the images of furry animals in Russia, and they're buying such a cheap thing, although maybe entertaining for them. So why don't we actually be more proactive in terms of actually spreading the narratives that could actually be political, or could actually be impacting the Russian state as such? Like, that we. I'm talking about a kind of this cognitive warfare to which I quite often refer to, but it shows that there is a place for us to actually to plant our own narratives in Russian minds.
Final question to you, Bartłomiej. Nuclear war, or Armageddon, as we see, thought of it in the Cold War, seems to be low on the list.
Oh, there is this old Sting song that I hope that Russians love their children too. It is low on the list because I think that this is also very much connected to this idea that the Russian state is potent enough that it will not be threatened by the nuclear arms of the other nations. So here is rather actually if anyone was to push the red button first, it will be rather Russians. So at least at this point, I mean, what I read from that is that actually the messaging, the escalatory language of Putin is always actually. It is aimed at the Western societies. So Russians themselves, they do not feel that threatened. Maybe this kind of the narrative is not that present in their on their own in their own media sphere. At the same time, maybe there's still actually. They still believe that this war can be actually won through the very conventional in a very conventional way.
Yes, if the Russians love their children too, they probably shouldn't have sent them off to war to be killed. 500,000 of them, I suppose.
For the sake of Mother Russia, as Putin describes that, he made this decision, and I certainly can only say that the blood is on his hands.
Yes. Bartłomiej, thank you very much for coming onto the programme. Great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So that's all we have time for today. Do join us next time for How We Got Here.